They laughed before she even spoke. Not because she said something wrong, but because they had already decided who she was worth being. A room full of strangers judged her in seconds. Poor, black, a mail-order bride they thought no one would ever choose. Every whisper cut deeper, every laugh tried to break her, but then the door opened, and the most powerful man in that town walked in. Not to laugh, not to judge, but to make a choice that would silence every voice in that room. What happened next turned humiliation into destiny, and exposed who truly had value. They laughed before she even spoke. Not the kind of laugh that bursts out by accident, but the slow, mean kind. The kind that crawls across a room and settles into your chest, heavy and unwanted. It rolled from one corner of the hall to the other, feeding on itself, growing louder as people realized they were not alone in their cruelty. She stood there anyway. The black woman remained at the front of the small rural hall, hands folded so tightly her fingers had gone numb. Her shoulders were straight, but her chin was slightly lowered, not in shame, but in caution. She had learned long ago how to make herself smaller without disappearing. The wooden floor beneath her feet was worn thin from decades of boots and dust, and the walls smelled faintly of old paint and hay. This place was meant for meetings about crops and land disputes, not for deciding the worth of a human being. But tonight, that was exactly what it had become. A mail-order bride. That was the name they had given her before she had even opened her mouth. A label, stamped onto her like a price tag. Something ordered. Something delivered, something replaceable. Whispers floated through the air, sharp and careless, desperate, poor, used. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were spoken just loud enough to reach her ears, just soft enough for the speakers to pretend innocence if confronted. Each one landed like a slap she wasn't allowed to react to. The matchmaker stood beside her, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. A woman with a tight smile and tired eyes, clutching a clipboard like it might shield her from the room. She cleared her throat, the sound thin and weak against the laughter that still lingered. "Thank you all for coming," the matchmaker said, her voice practiced, polite, brittle. "Let's remember this is a respectful process." Respectful. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. Men leaned back in their chairs, arms stretched wide, confidence dripping from their posture. Some wore work jackets, others clean shirts meant to signal status. Their eyes moved over the woman at the front of the room like she was an item on display, appraising, measuring, dismissing. Women sat with their arms crossed, lips tight, their judgment colder somehow. Their stares cut deeper than the men's laughter. They looked at her like she was breaking a rule simply by standing there, like her presence alone threatened something they had worked hard to protect. Someone muttered, "Who'd ever choose her?" The words were not meant to be heard, but they were, loud enough to slice through the room, loud enough to make her breath catch for half a second. Her face burned. Heat rushed to her cheeks, her ears. That familiar sting behind the eyes threatened to spill over. But she did not cry. She never cried in front of people like this. Crying had never saved her. Crying had only ever taught others that they were winning. She swallowed hard and kept her gaze steady on the far wall, focusing on a crack in the pie. That looked like a crooked line trying to escape. Her past had trained her well. She had grown up learning how to endure, learning how to survive rooms where no one wanted you, but everyone felt entitled to judge you. Poverty had taught her silence. Loss had taught her patience. Life had taught her that dignity was not something given freely. It was something you guarded quietly, like a small flame cupped in your hands while the wind tried to blow it out. The matchmaker began reading from the clipboard, listing facts like they were enough to justify her existence. Age, skills, willingness to relocate, willingness to adapt. Every sentence sounded like another test she had already failed in their eyes. She answered when spoken to, softly, clearly. Her voice did not shake, even when her heart did. Each word was careful, measured. She had learned how to speak without inviting attack. Still, the room did not soften. A man in the front row smirked and whispered something to his neighbor. Both of them laughed. A woman rolled her eyes and sighed loudly, as if the whole thing were an inconvenience. She felt the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. The unspoken message was clear. You are not wanted here. You are here because you have nowhere else to go." They did not know how far she had traveled to stand in this room. They did not know what she had left behind, and they did not care. Then the door opened. It wasn't loud. It didn't slam. It creaked slowly, the old hinges complaining as they always did. But the sound cut through the room sharper than any laugh. Boots hit the wooden floor. One step, then another, slow, heavy, certain. The laughter faded, not all at once, but in pieces. A chuckle died in someone's throat. A whisper went unfinished. Chairs stopped creaking as people shifted to see who had entered. The man who stepped inside did not rush. He did not apologize for being late. He did not smile. He filled the doorway without trying to. Broa. Shoulders stretched the fabric of his coat. His hands were rough, scarred from years of work, hanging relaxed at his sides. His boots were clean, expensive, but worn in the way that said they were used, not decorative. The kind of boots worn by someone who owned land and walked it daily. His face was calm, too calm, weathered by sun and wind, but not by doubt. His eyes were sharp, dark, unread. Eyes that had seen bad seasons and worse people and had learned when to speak and when to wait. The room shifted around him. People straightened in their seats. A few men sat up taller, suddenly aware of their posture. Someone cleared their throat nervously. A woman whispered his name, barely audible, like it carried weight even in silence. The wealthy farmer, everyone knew who he was. Land he owned, the deals he had made, the influence he carried in this town. He was not a man who attended gatherings like this. He did not need to. The matchmaker froze for half a second, then smiled too wide. "I didn't realize you would be joining us," she said quickly. He did not answer her. He did not greet the room. He did not acknowledge the stares. His gaze moved past the rows of chai. Past the men who had been laughing, past the women who had been judging. It stopped on her. For the first time since she had walked into the hall, someone looked at her without calculation, without amusement, without contempt. He simply looked. She felt it immediately, that strange, unsettling sensation of being seen without being exposed. Her hands tightened instinctively, but she did not look away. Something in his expression made her hold still, like prey that suddenly realizes the hunter is not there to harm it. The silence grew heavy, uncomfortable. He took another step forward, then another. The sound of his boots echoed in the room, each step measured, deliberate. He moved down the center aisle, not in a hurry, not hesitant either. Like a man walking onto his own land. Pio. Flo watched him, unsure what to do with their faces now. Smiles faded. Smirks collapsed. No one laughed. He stopped several feet away from her. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the kind carved by long days and longer nights. She could see the way his jaw tightened slightly as he took her in. Not her clothes, not her posture, her. He still did not speak. The matchmaker shifted. Again. "We were just beginning introductions," she offered, her voice thinner now. He nodded once, barely. But his eyes never left the woman standing at the front of the room. In that moment something subtle changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. The power in the room, which had rested comfortably in the hands of the many, began to tilt. The woman felt it before she understood. A loosening in her chest, a pause in the storm. The cruel energy that had filled the hall moments ago faltered, uncertain of itself. No one knew why he was there. Some assumed curiosity. Others whispered about business. A few wondered if this was some kind of joke. No one guessed the truth. He took a seat in the back, folding his large frame into a simple wooden chair that suddenly seemed too small for him. He rested his hands on his knees and waited. The matchmaker hesitated, then continued, stumbling slightly over her words as she resumed the process. The questions resumed. The judgment lingered. But it was different now. Every laugh felt risky. Every whisper felt exposed. The W. Oman at the front of the room stood a little straighter without realizing it. She did not smile. She did not relax. But something inside her steadied. She did not know why this man had come. She did not know what he thought of her. She had learned better than to hope. Still, in the quiet between breaths, she felt something unfamiliar brush against her chest. Possibility. The farmer watched. Lent. Patient. His eyes followed every exchange, every smirk, every careless word. He saw the way her fingers tightened when someone laughed, the way her shoulders lifted slightly, bracing for impact that never quite stopped coming. And he remembered rooms like this, different faces, same cruelty. He remembered what it felt like to be underestimated, to be measured by surface and circumstance instead of substance. He did not interrupt. Not yet. The room carried on, unaware that it was being weighed, unaware that something irreversible had already begun. The woman answered another question, soft, composed, stronger than they knew, and the man in the back of the hall made a decision without saying a word. The night was far from over, and no one in that room was prepared for what would come next. The whispers came back sharper this time, like blades pulled from their sheaths. They slid across the room with new confidence now that the surprise had settled. People leaned toward one another, voices low but careless, assuming safety in numbers. Why's he here? Probably just curious. He wouldn't actually... The sentences never finished. They didn't have to. The thought behind them was enough, thick with disbelief and mockery. The farmer sat in the back of the hall, his large frame still, his presence quiet but impossible to ignore. He rested his elbows lightly on his knees, fingers loosely intertwined. He watched, not with anger yet, not with pity, with attention, the kind of attention that made people uncomfortable when they realized too late they were being studied. He did not interrupt, he did not rescue. He let the room show itself fully, the way you let water settle so the dirt can rise. The matchmaker forced another smile and continued, her voice wavering just enough to betray her nerves. She introduced the next part of the process as if this were a normal evening, as if the woman standing beside her were not being slowly pulled apart by strangers. Chairs creaked as people shifted, settling in like spectators. This was becoming entertainment. One man stood up without being invited. He was tall, broad, wearing a clean jacket that smelled of money more than work. He didn't look at the matchmaker when he spoke. He looked directly at the woman. "So," he said, drawing the word out, "do you even know how to be a wife?" The questio. N wasn't curiosity. It was a challenge, a test designed for failure. Laughter erupted again, louder than before, sharper. It bounced off the walls and filled the hall, turning her into a punchline. Someone slapped a knee. Someone else shook his head, smiling as if the answer were already decided. She felt the sound hit her chest, felt it vibrate there, threatening to crack something open. For a moment, the old instinct screamed at her to shrink, to disappear into the floorboards. Her fingers tightened until her nails pressed into her palms. Then she breathed. She lifted her eyes just enough to meet the man's gaze. Not boldly, not submissively, just enough. "I know how to respect," she said softly. "I know how to listen. I know how to work through hard days without running away." Her voice was calm, clear, no edge, no apology. The laughter faltered, confused by the lack of performance. She didn't give them what they wanted. No tears, no anger, no desperation. And that seemed to make them angrier. Another man chimed in from his seat. "Sounds like a script," he said, smirking. "Anyone can say that." She nodded once. "Anyone can," she agreed. "Not everyone does." A few scoffs followed. A woman in the second row leaned forward, her bracelets clinking as she crossed her arms tighter. "This isn't charity," she said loudly. "Men want value." The word value dropped into the room like a stone. It sank deep. The woman at the front of the hall felt it land in her stomach, heavy and cold. Value, a word she had heard all her life, usually spoken by people who had never shamed their own. Value measured in skin tone, in background, in how easy you were to replace. She didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. The insult was clear. In the back of the room, the farmer's jaw tightened, just slightly, almost imperceptible, but it was there. His eyes flicked to the woman who had spoken, then back to the woman standing alone at the front. He shifted in his chair, the wood creaking softly under his weight. The matchmaker hesitated, fingers gripping the clipboard too hard. She glanced toward the farmer, then back to the crowd. Her voice grew smaller. Let's keep things respectful," she said again, though it sounded more like a plea now. She turned back to the woman. "You can tell them why you chose this path," she offered gently, already bracing her. Self. The room quieted, waiting. The woman drew in a breath. She felt the room leaning toward her, hungry for weakness. She felt the weight of their expectations pressing down, urging her to justify herself, to beg. Her voice trembled just slightly when she spoke. Not from fear. From truth. I believe love should be chosen with dignity, she said. Not forced by fear. Not traded like a favor. I'm here because I believe partnership should be built on respect. For a heartbeat, the room went silent. Not the good kind of silence. Not the kind that honors words. This was the kind that waits, tense and awkward, for permission to strike again. Then someone laughed. One sharp burst, then another, louder this time, encouraged by the first. Relief flooding in as cruelty reclaimed its space. A man shook his head. Dignity doesn't put food on the table, he said. Reality does. More laughter followed. Someone clapped sarcastically. The woman felt the heat return to her face. Her shoulders lifted just a fraction, bracing. She stared at a spot on the floor, letting the noise wash over her. She reminded herself why she was here. She reminded herself that endurance was not weakness. But the room had crossed a line. In the back, the farmer exhaled slowly through his nose. He had seen enough. He had heard enough. He had allowed the cruelty to stretch as far as it could go, to expose itself fully. There was no confusion now. No benefit of the doubt left to give. He pushed his hands against his knees and stood. The sound of the chair scraping back against the floor was not loud, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. Conversations died mid-sentence. Smiles far. O's, unsure. He stood slowly, deliberately, taking his time, every movement controlled, unrushed, every eye turned. The man who had been laughing loudest fell silent, his grin slipping. The woman with the bracelet straightened, suddenly alert, the matchmaker's breath caught in her throat. The farmer stepped into the aisle. His boots echoed with each step, steady and calm. He walked past the first row of chairs, past the men who had leaned back with confidence minutes earlier. None of them met his gaze now. He passed the women who had judged from folded arms and tight lips. Their eyes followed him, wide and uncertain. The woman at the front of the room felt his presence before she turned. The air around her seemed change, like a storm shifting direction. She glanced sideways, her heart beating harder now, not with fear, but with something she couldn't name. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, close enough that the room understood without words that something irreversible was happening. He did not touch her yet. He did not look at the crowd right away. He looked at her, and in that look she felt something break open. Not painfully, gently, like a door she had kept locked for years finally cracking under its own weight. The room held its breath. No one spoke. No one laughed. The power that had belonged to the many now hovered, unsteady, searching for where it belonged. And the farmer stood there, silent, his presence a promise and a warning all at once, as the woman beside him stared ahead, unsure whether she was about to be saved or judged in an entirely new way. The night was turning, and everyone in that room felt it, even if they didn't yet understand what it would cost them. He didn't look at the crowd, not even for a second. All the whispers, the stares, the half-held breaths behind him faded into nothing. The only thing that existed in that moment was the woman standing beside him, the woman who had been laughed at, measured, reduced, the woman who had stood still while a room tried to decide how little she was worth. He looked only at her. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She felt the heat of his presence at her side, solid and steady, like a wall against the wind. She didn't dare turn her head, didn't dare assume anything. Life had taught her not to trust silence. Silence had often come right before disappointment. Then he spoke. "I've seen enough." His voice was calm, low, certain. Not raised, not dramatic. And somehow that made it louder than any shout. The room froze. It was the kind of freeze that steals sound from the air. Chairs stopped creaking, breaths paused halfway in, even the dust seemed to hang still. He turned his head slightly, just enough to address the matchmaker. "I choose her." The words landed like thunder. Gasps rippled through the hall, a sharp intake of breath here, a choked whisper there. Disbelief moved faster than sound, flashing across faces that had been so confident just moments before. The matchmaker stared at him, mouth parted, clipboard forgotten. You choose her?" she repeated weakly, as if saying it aloud might make it make sense. Someone near the front stammered, unable to stop themselves. You know who she is, right?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Poor, black, unwanted. The same unspoken words they had been throwing at her all night. The farmer nodded once. "I know exactly who she is." His gaze returned to the woman beside him. She felt her throat tighten. Exactly who she is. No one had ever said that before. People had always told her who she was supposed to be, what she represented, what she lacked. No one had ever claimed to see her clearly. Then he did something no one expected. He lifted his hand and placed it gently over hers. The contact was light, respectful, but it sent a shock through her body that she couldn't hide. Her fingers twitched under his palm, unsure whether to pull away or hold on. He didn't squeeze, didn't grip. He simply rested his hand there, a quiet declaration. Protective, certain. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone scoffed under their breath, then stopped when they realized no one else was laughing. "I don't need a woman who performs for approval," the farmer said, his voice steady, carrying easily across the room. "I need one who keeps her dignity when the world tries to take it." The words hit harder than any insult that had come before. The laughter died instantly. Not faded, not softened. It died. Cut off at the root. Faces that had been twisted in mockery now stared in shock. Eyes widened, mouths closed. Some people looked down, suddenly interested in the floor. Others looked at her again, really looked this time, as if seeing her for the first time. There was envy there, sharp and bitter. And shame, too, creeping in where confidence had lived moments earlier. The farmer turned slightly, finally letting his gaze sweep across the room. His eyes were calm, but there was no warmth in them now. "She isn't something to be inspected," he said, louder this time. "She's someone to be chosen." The silence that followed was defer. NT from before. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't cruel. It was stunned. The woman felt her eyes burn. Tears welled up, blurring the edges of the room. But these were not the tears she had fought all evening. These were not tears of humiliation. They were tears of relief, of being seen. She blinked hard, trying to keep them from falling, but one escaped anyway, sliding down her cheek. She didn't pee it away. She didn't need to. In that single moment, the power in the room flipped. The same people who had dismissed her, who had spoken over her, who had treated her like a problem to be solved, now understood something terrible and undeniable. They had revealed themselves, not to her, to him, to each other. The farmer didn't argue with them. He didn't explain his wealth, his status, his reasons. He didn't justify his choice. He didn't owe them anything. He simply turned back to the woman. "Are you ready to go?" he asked quietly. The question wasn't a command. It wasn't an assumption. It was an invitation. She swallowed hard. Her voice came out softer than she meant it to, but steady. "Yes." He nodded, satisfied. Together they turned toward the door. A ripple of movement followed. Chairs scraped as people shifted, unsure whether to stand, speak, or remain frozen. Someone opened their mouth, as if to object, then closed it again when no words came. The matchmaker finally found her voice. "Sir, we still need to—" He stopped and looked at her. Just a look, calm, unyielding. "There's nothing more to discuss," he said. He opened the door and stepped aside, allowing the woman to pass through first. She hesitated for half a heartbeat. The hall behind her felt heavy now, thick with the weight of everything that had been said and done. Then she stepped forward. The cool night air hit her face as she crossed the threshold. It smelled of grass and earth and freedom. Her lungs filled deeper than they had all evening. Behind her, the door closed. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Outside, the parking lot was dimly lit, quiet. Crickets chirped somewhere in the dark. The world felt strangely normal, as if nothing monumental had just happened. She stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with her hands, with her heart, with the sudden absence of cruelty. Her legs felt weak, like they had been holding her up on pure will alone. The farmer turned to her. Up close, his expression softened. Not pity, not pride, just understanding. "I hope I didn't overstep," he said. "I didn't want to speak for you." She shook her head slowly. "You didn't," she said. Her voice trembled now, finally allowed to. "You stood with me." He nodded. "That's all I meant to do." They walked toward his truck in silence. A comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't demand explanation. Inside the hall, people remained seated long after they were gone. No one laughed, no one spoke loudly. The air felt stale now, sour with regret. The man who had asked if she knew how to be a wife stared at his hands, replaying the moment over and over. The woman who had spoken about value felt her cheeks burn, realizing how small her words sounded now. They would tell the story later. Each of them would change, it slightly to make themselves look better, to soften their cruelty, to pretend they hadn't meant it the way it came out. But the truth would remain. They mocked a woman they did not understand, and they were exposed by a man who refused to join them. As the truck pulled away, the woman looked out the window, watching the building shrink behind them. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel revenge. She felt something quieter. Safety. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't bracing for the next blow. The farmer kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. He didn't glance at her. Didn't demand gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. He nodded once. "I know." She studied him in the dim light, trying to understand the man who had walked into a room full of cruelty and chosen compassion without hesitation. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Because I've learned something over the years." She waited. "People will tell you who they are when they think no one important is watching," he said. "Tonight, I watched." She looked away, swallowing the lump in her throat. The road stretched ahead, dark and open. The future uncertain, but the fear that had followed her for so long felt distant now, like an echo fading into the night. Behind them, a room full of people sat with their judgment and their shame. Ahead of them, something new waited, and neither of them knew exactly what it would become. Outside, the air felt lighter the moment she stepped away from that building. It was as if the night itself had been holding its breath and finally decided to let go. The cool breeze touched her face, gentle and clean, washing away the stale weight that had pressed against her chest for hours. For the first time that evening, she filled her lungs completely. She stopped walking, just stood there under the open sky, her shoulders slowly lowering, the tension slipping from her body inch by inch. Her hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from the sudden absence of it. When you've lived too long, bracing for pain, peace can feel unfamiliar, almost overwhelming. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. Her voice barely carried, but it didn't need to. He heard her. The farmer turned toward her, the corners of his mouth lifting into a small, knowing smile. Not proud, not smug, just calm. "Neither did they," he said. The words were simple, but they landed deep. She glanced back once, just once, at the dark shape of the hall behind them. The windows were dim now, the inside hidden, but she could still feel the echo of laughter trapped in those walls. It no longer reached her. They walked on. Life with him did not arrive like a fairy tale. There were no sudden miracles that erased her past. No moment where everything painful simply vanished. Her history came with her. Every scar, every memory, every quiet lesson learned the hard way, and that was the difference. On his land, she was not asked to forget who she had been. She was not asked to erase herself to fit a new life. She was not reduced to a story of rescue. She was a partner. From the first morning she woke up there, the sun pouring through the window onto worn wooden floors, she felt it, the respect. It lived in the small things, in the way he asked her opinion, in the way he waited for her answer, in the way he never spoke over her, never corrected her in front of others, never used his wealth like a shield or a weapon. The land stretched wide and open, rows of fields breathing under the sky. It was quiet there, but not low. Nellie. Work was shared. Decisions were shared. Silence, when it came, was comfortable. She learned the rhythms of the place. Early mornings, honest labor. Long evenings where the world slowed down enough to let you hear yourself think. The work was hard, but it was clean. And every day, she felt a little stronger, not because she had been hardened, but because she was finally safe enough to soften. She laughed again. slowly at first, then more freely. He noticed, but he never commented on it. He understood that healing didn't need an audience. Words spread through the town faster than anyone expected. At first it came as whispers. The wealthy farmer had chosen her, not as a favor, not as a joke. Chosen her. The same woman they had mocked, the same woman they had measured and dismissed. People repeated the story with different tones, changing details, softening their own roles in it. Some spoke with disbelief, some with envy, a few with embarrassment they tried hard to hide. Then the whispers changed. Her name was spoken differently now, with care, with caution, with respect. When she walked through town beside him, heads turned, conversations paused, people watched the way H.E. held doors for her, the way he leaned in to listen when she spoke, the way she stood beside him without shrinking. Some offered smiles that came too late. Others nodded stiffly, unsure how to bridge the distance they themselves had created. She noticed it all, and she didn't need it. Their approval no longer held power over her. It never truly had. She had just been taught to believe it did. The farmer had wealth, yes, land, influence, comfort. But what he recognized in her that night had nothing to do with survival or service. He had seen something most people missed because they were too busy judging. Grace under fire, quiet resilience, a soul that had been tested and refused to break. She had endured ridicule without becoming cruel. She had carried pain without letting it poison. And her. She had learned to stand still in rooms that tried to make her disappear. That kind of strength could not be bought, and the people who laughed that day were left with something they could not outrun. A lesson. It followed them into their homes, into their conversations, into the quiet moments when there was no crowd to perform for. They replayed the scene in their minds, whether they anted to or not. The laughter, the words, the way the power shifted so suddenly it stole their breath. Some tried to excuse themselves. It was just a joke. Everyone was laughing. We didn't mean it like that. But excuses grow thin when the truth has been spoken out loud. The loudest mockery often hides the deepest emptiness. The need to feel superior. The fear of being unseen. The comfort of judging someone who feels safe to judge. They had all been exposed that night, not by anger, not by force, but by dignity. And dignity is a mirror no one can avoid. She never returned to that hall. She didn't need to. The story had already closed its door behind her. Instead, she built something new. She planted alongside him. She planned alongside him. She learned the land and let it learn her. She found joy in small victories. A field well tended. A meal shared in quiet satisfaction. A night sky so wide it made the past feel small. There were hard days. Healing is never a straight line. Some nights, old memories rose up uninvited, pressing against her chest. On those nights, he didn't try to fix her. He sat beside her, sometimes in silence, sometimes with a few steady words. That was enough. She realized something slowly over time. She had never needed saving. What she had needed was space to be human. The town adjusted whether it wanted to or not. Children learned her name without prejudice. Neighbors learned to measure their words. Some never apologized, but their behavior changed, and that spoke loudly enough. Others did apologize, quietly, awkwardly, not always we. She accepted what felt genuine. She released the rest. Because forgiveness, she learned, was not about making others comfortable. It was about freeing yourself. And she was free. Years later, people would still tell the story. About the night a room full of judgment was turned upside down. About the woman who stood tall when laughter tried to bend her. About the farmer who refused to look away. But the true story was simpler than that. It was about choice. The choice to see instead of assume. The choice to stand instead of sit comfortably in cruelty. The choice to recognize humanity where others refuse to look. Because in the end, wealth is not measured by land or money or power. It is measured by the courage to honor dignity when it is easiest to ignore it. And the richest people are not those who judge from comfort. They are the ones who choose respect when no one is watching.